In this video, we're going to take a look at a purple ink by Akkerman, their number 13. Now, as always, there's timestamps down below so you can skip around, but if you've got the time, I'd appreciate you checking out the entire video. Also, down in the description is a link to the purple ink playlist, so if you wanted to see more, you can find that there. I'm an ink guy, and let's get into the first writing sample done on 90 GSM Clairfontaine. No bleeding, no ghosting. We get no feather, no spread. We get some spots of shading in that it's a very dark purple, but we certainly see very dark areas in some of the writing in the extra fine. Nothing for the stub, and we even see it happen again in the medium. So it's interesting because it's dark, but then shades to super dark. Now the extra fine and medium are the same tone, just a little lighter than the stub. The extra fine took 12 seconds to dry while the medium took 20. The scrubby for both do show us some of that color variation that we're getting in there, that peppering of very dark spots. And the smear test you could not recover if you smeared while you were writing. To have a range of experience with this ink, all of the writing samples are done with a Jinhao 159 with a 1.1 stub, a Jinhao X450 with a medium, and a Jinhao X750 with an extra fine. Then a Kaweco Sport with a broad nib was inked up, used for a day, and used to take the notes for this video. The next writing sample is done on 52 GSM Tomoe River. We have no bleeding, some minor ghosting. We get no feather, no spread, no shading in the stub, only a few dark spots show up in the extra fine. Same for those few dark spots showing up in the medium. Now the extra fine and the medium are the same tone, both a little bit lighter than the stub. The extra fine took 21 seconds to dry. Medium, 38. Scrubby for both show no color variation, but we definitely get it in the writing in those darker spots. And the interesting thing that it doesn't show up in the writing so much, but in the scrubby for the extra fine, we see a halo that's occurred. It's a dark outline all the way around where the ink managed to gather together and become quite a bit darker. That's the shading that we see up in the writing. Smear test says you could not recover if you smeared while you were writing. I agree with Vita. There's a lot to learn by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. A line of ink is put down and then it's put in the water for 10 to 15 seconds. And we see a very nice purple that is forming the very beginning of a line at the bottom, but the rest of it is really pushing its way up. But at the top, we get this very interesting blue. Now that blue is likely what's causing that amount of shading that we see in the writing. The one on the right that's allowed to dry for 10 minutes, the only real difference we're seeing is that line on the bottom, really joining with the paper. It's bonding right there, showing that that purple aspect might be a little bit resistant. The next writing sample is done on 80 GSM Rhodia dot pad. We have no bleeding, no ghosting. The spot that was back there was just a transfer from another page. We have no feather, no spread, no shading in the stub. Shading in the extra fine in those very dark spots, peppered very nicely. The medium is mostly dark, but occasionally we see some lighter spots coming through, so it has shading as well. All of them tend to be right about the same tone. Now the extra fine took 11 seconds to dry and medium took 18. Scrubby for both show no color variation, but we do get that very nice peppering of shading throughout. And the smear test you could not recover if you smeared while you were writing. Resistance tests are done to see how this ink could be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it may be to clean from your pen. This smear is allowed to dry for 3 days before testing it. Looking at the highlighter, it performed pretty well. We do see a little bit of blurriness that's occurring on the G and the H, but the information's protected, so you could feel safe using it in a note-taking situation if you wanted to do that and go back and highlight. Water's lifting all the darkest tones, but really leaving that purple in place that we saw in the second chromatography. And Pen Flush is doing the exact same thing. Now, when it came to cleaning this out of the pen, I had a little bit of difficulty and had to disassemble the feed because I just had a little bit of ink that was holding out. I didn't have to get to the pen flush, but I did have to disassemble a little bit farther than normal to make it so only water was used to clean it out of my pen. Now, the 1/3 bleach solution, I had no need to use it. You're not going to need it, but it completely obliterates this ink. The next writing sample is done on Word notebooks. Not known to be fountain pen friendly, and it really does show it here. None of the spots I'm circling touch the page underneath. It's just the spots where it's coming in very deep, and we're getting quite a bit of ghosting. Now, this is a pocket-sized notebook. I think this might stop me from using the back of the page, but it might not stop everybody. In general, I think that's fairly good performance. The medium has some feathering, but it's all tiny. Again, for the paper, I don't see that as so bad. Same with the extra fine. It has feathering, but it's all really tiny and not the end of the world. Both the medium and the extra fine have a bit of spread. Not unmanageable. Their tone is exactly the same and there's no shading. The extra fine only took a second to dry. The scrubby shows no color variation. There was none, and you can't smear it, so you don't have to worry about it. For the inks tested, the average viscosity was 2.5, with the realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9. Akkerman's number 13 has a viscosity of 1.92, making this a wetter ink. The next writing sample is done on 28-pound copy paper. We do have a couple of spots where it gets much deeper into the page. It doesn't come anywhere near coming through the page, and I don't think it would stop you from using the back of the page. We have feathering that occurs in the medium, feathering that occurs in the extra fine. Now, the extra fine feathering is well under control. It only gives it a slight blurry look. Not too fond of how it's looking with the medium, but it's not out of control. They both have a little bit of spread. They have no tone variation between them and no shading in any of the writing. The extra fine only took a second to dry. Its scrubby shows no color variation. There's no shading in the writing. And the smear test you could definitely recover if you smeared while you were writing. For the inks tested, the average dry time was 17 seconds, with the realm of normal being from 13 to 21 seconds. Akkerman's number 13 has an average dry time of 20 seconds, so it's normal. The last writing sample is done on 20-pound copy paper. There's a lot of spots where the ink is getting very deep into the paper, but not through the paper. None of this is going to corrupt the next page, but I believe that all of it stops you from being able to use the back of the page for fear of corrupting both sides where you can't use them. Now, the medium has tiny feathering, as does the extra fine. The medium has a slight bit of spread, and so does the extra fine. It goes to slightly more than a fine. The extra fine looks just a hair lighter than the medium. It has no shading. It only took a second to dry. Its scrubby shows no color variation, and the writing didn't show any either. And the smear test, you can't smear it, so you don't have to worry about it. Instead of finding inks that look like Akkerman's number 13, I'd prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. I decided to go with a green ink by Papier Plume, their Forest Green. Now, if you'd prefer a different complement color, then down in the description are links to those playlists. So what do I think of Akkerman's number 13? A very dark purple that stays a purple and still has shading. It's never so dark it almost looks black. I don't know why this doesn't get more attention. It's nice and unlike most of the purples that I've taken a look at. So what nib and pen will give the best writing experience with this ink? It is at its standout best with a medium to dry, not dry, but medium to dry pen with a medium or fine nib. I hope you got something out of this video, and in the next video, we're going to take a look at Sailor Kobe number 47.